March 17, 1983, Harland, Pennsylvania. Estelle Vogel stood in the empty office of the Harland Coal Company superintendent and stared at the steel filing cabinet in the corner. The drawer hung open, its lock forced, the interior stripped clean. Someone had broken in during the night, taken the official ledgers, the property deeds, the payroll records, everything of obvious value. But they hadn't found what mattered. Because what mattered was hidden elsewhere, in her house. In a hatbox from Gimbel's, tucked beneath a loose floorboard in her bedroom. 11 leather-bound journals filled with her cramped accountant's script, the real records of Harland. The ones that never made it into official reports. The ones that documented who owned what before 1942, before the war changed everything. Before someone accused someone else. Before someone disappeared. Before someone hung themselves in their garage. Before someone claimed what wasn't theirs and kept quiet for 40 years. Estelle was the only living person who remembered it all. And now, as the mine shut down and the town died, they were coming to her. First one at a time, then in groups. With demands, with pleas, with threats. Give us back what was ours. Tell us who owned what. She sat in her kitchen, poured coffee, and thought, if she told the truth, half the town would kill the other half. Because this ground was soaked in blood, and that blood hadn't dried. It was just waiting. The office smelled of mildew and coal dust. It had always smelled that way. 40 years she'd worked here, and the smell never changed. The walls were covered in yellowed maps of the mine shafts, tunnel diagrams dating back to 1887 when the first seam was discovered. The desk where she'd sat for decades calculating payroll, tracking tonnage, recording every ounce of coal pulled from the earth. It was still there, covered in dust. The adding machine sat silent, its keys frozen. The typewriter she'd used to type weekly reports to Philadelphia, someone had stolen it last month. Probably sold it for scrap. Everything was being stripped, taken, divided. The carcass of Harland was being picked clean. She walked to the window, looked out at Main Street. Empty. Half the buildings boarded up. The company store, closed since 1980. The post office, open 3 days a week now. The diner, shuttered. The church, abandoned. Father Maloney had left for Altoona in November, said there weren't enough parishioners to justify staying. The school had closed in 1978, no children left. The young families had all gone, to Pittsburgh, to Harrisburg, to anywhere with jobs. Only the old remained, the ones too stubborn or too poor to leave. The ones still waiting for pensions that would never come. The ones still hoping the mine would reopen. It wouldn't. Estelle locked the office door behind her, walked down Main Street toward her house, past the boarded-up hardware store that had belonged to Ezra Kensington, past the lot where Thornton's tools used to stand, past the empty dairy barn on the edge of town where Stan Kowalczyk once milked cows at dawn. Every building told a story. Every empty lot held a ghost. She knew them all, had written them all down. 41 years of secrets, preserved in cramped handwriting, hidden under her bedroom floor. To understand how Estelle Vogel ended up at the center of this nightmare, you have to go back 41 years, to the day her father, Elwood Percival Whitmore, company accountant, brought home a hatbox and said, "Keep this safe, daughter. Someday the truth will matter." She was 20 years old, 1942, Harland, Pennsylvania. The war was in full swing. Every young man who could pass a physical was either already in Europe or waiting for his orders. The ones who stayed behind, the 4 Fs, the essential workers, the ones with medical exemptions, lived under a cloud of suspicion. Why weren't they fighting? What was wrong with them? Were they cowards? Traitors? The questions hung in the air like coal smoke. Harland was a company town, owned body and soul by Harland Coal. The mine had been there since 1887, and most families had worked it for 3 generations. They lived in company houses, identical 2-story structures painted gray, arranged in neat rows on the hillside above the mine entrance. They bought from the company store, the only store for 10 miles in any direction. They borrowed from the company credit union when times were tight, which was most of the time. They sent their children to the company school. They prayed in the company-built church. They were born in company houses and buried in the company cemetery. When times were good, it was tolerable. When times were bad, it was futile. And during the war, times were very bad. Rationing hit Harland hard. Sugar, meat, butter, gasoline, rubber, nails, wire. Everything was scarce. The Office of Price Administration controlled distribution, set quotas, investigated violations. Black markets flourished. People hoarded. People informed. The government encouraged it. __quote_1__ campaigns. Posters at the post office. Radio announcements. Turn in anyone you suspect of undermining the war effort. Hoarding is treason. Profiteering is treason. Disloyalty is treason. And people listened. Because fear makes informants of everyone. Elwood Whitmore was one of the few educated men in town. He'd gone to business college in Pittsburgh in 1920, learned proper bookkeeping, studied accounting principles, graduated 3rd in his class. He could have stayed in the city, worked for a bank or a manufacturing firm. But his father was dying, his mother needed help, and Harland was home. He returned in 1925. The company made him head accountant. The job was simple and terrible. Record who owned what, who owed what, and who lost everything when they couldn't pay. The company owned the mine, but individual families owned small businesses, farms, houses outside the company rows. These were their lifelines, their independence, their legacy. The hardware store, the machine shop, the dairy farm, the woodworking mill, these represented generations of work, saved money, dreams passed from father to son. And during the war, one by one, they all fell. He kept 2 sets of books, one official sent to the company headquarters in Philadelphia. Everything proper, everything legal, every transaction recorded according to generally accepted accounting principles. Debits and credits balanced, assets and liabilities reconciled, clean numbers that told nothing. The other was secret. A parallel ledger kept in leather-bound journals he bought with his own money, where he wrote the truth, not just the numbers, but the stories behind them. Who sold their property voluntarily? Who was forced? Who was arrested? Who fled in the night? And most importantly, who informed on whom? Because the accusations flew like sparks from the furnaces, neighbor against neighbor, brother against brother, business rival against rival. Sometimes from envy, sometimes from fear, sometimes from genuine belief that they were serving their country, sometimes just to get someone else's land, someone else's store, someone else's livelihood. Estelle remembered her father sitting up late at night, writing by lamplight. His hand trembled. He drank bourbon, which he'd never touched before the war. Her mother wept in the bedroom. Outside, the wind rattled the windows, and it seemed like those who were gone stood just beyond the glass, watching, accusing, demanding to be remembered. Elwood would tell his daughter, quote 2. She nodded, understanding the weight of it. She was 20, then 21, then 22. She learned to read her father's entries, learned to understand what lay between the lines, learned the code he used, initials, dates, cryptic abbreviations that would mean nothing to an outsider but told her everything. Learned to keep silent. Learned that silence was a skill, a weapon, a shield. In a town of informants, silence was survival. Elwood told her the stories, insisted she memorize them. Each entry wasn't just a line in a ledger. It was a life, a family, a tragedy compressed into cramped script. There was the Kensington family, Ezra Kensington, 45 years old in 1942, owned the only independent hardware store in town. Not the company store, his own business. His grandfather, Josiah Kensington, had started it in 1889, right after the mine opened. Josiah saw that miners needed tools, nails, rope, lamp oil. He opened a small shop on Main Street. His son, Ezra's father, expanded it in the 1910s, started selling to other mining towns within a day's wagon ride. Built a reputation for fair prices and honest weights. When Ezra took over in 1928, the store was thriving. He had 3 employees, inventory worth thousands of dollars, regular customers from 5 counties. He dreamed of passing it to his son Vernon, who was studying business at the community college in Altoona. But in April 1942, the accusations started. Someone filed a report with the Office of Price Administration, claiming Ezra was hoarding rationed goods, specifically nails, copper wire, and rubber gaskets. The OPA sent investigators. They searched the store, checked the inventory against Ezra's purchase records, found nothing irregular, everything accounted for. But the damage was done. Rumors spread. People started avoiding the store. Customers went to the company store instead, even though prices were higher. Ezra's credit dried up. Suppliers in Pittsburgh demanded payment up front instead of the usual 60-day terms. The bank, seeing the investigation, called his business loan, demanded immediate payment. Ezra didn't have the cash. The company offered to buy the store, 30 cents on the dollar. Ezra had no choice. He sold in July 1942, paid off the bank, had almost nothing left. 3 months later, in October, someone filed another report, this time with the FBI. Said Ezra had been heard saying the war was Roosevelt's fault, that we should have stayed out of Europe, that American boys were dying for British interests. FBI agents came to Harland, questioned Ezra, questioned his wife, questioned his neighbors. Found nothing. No evidence of disloyalty, no subversive activity. Just a broken man who'd lost his business. But Ezra couldn't take it anymore. The shame, the whispers, the looks on the street. On November 3rd, 1942, he put his service revolver, he'd been a corporal in the Great War, to his head in his garage. Left a wife, Margaret, and 3 children, Vernon, 19, Judith, 16, Robert, 12. The informant was Horace Bledsoe, Ezra's competitor. Horace had worked in Ezra's store from 1935 to 1939 as a clerk. Ezra had trained him, taught him the business, treated him like family. In 1939, Horace quit, said he wanted to start his own store. Ezra wished him well, gave him a letter of recommendation, but Horace couldn't compete. Ezra had the established reputation, the loyal customers, the better location. Horace's store failed within a year. He went back to work in the mine, bitter and resentful. When the war started and rationing began, Horace saw his opportunity. He filed the first report. Then, when that wasn't enough to destroy Ezra, he filed the second. After Ezra died, the company sold the store and inventory at auction. Horace bought it all, store location, fixtures, remaining inventory, for $800, a business worth $10,000. He reopened it under his own name, Bledsoe Hardware. Ran it for 26 years, made good money, gave generously to the church, helped his neighbors. Everyone thought he was a good man. Only Elwood Whitmore knew the truth, and he wrote it all down. Then there was the Kowalczyk family. Stanislav Kowalczyk, immigrant from Poland, arrived in Harland in 1921 at age 18. Worked in the mine for 7 years, saved every penny, bought a small dairy farm on the edge of town in 1928. 28 cows, 40 acres, good grazing land near the creek. He sold milk and butter to the company commissary, lived modestly but honestly in a small farmhouse he'd built himself. Married a Polish girl from Johnstown, Jadwiga, had 4 children. Piotr, born 1926, Kristina, born 1927, Kazimierz, born 1929, Eva, born 1932. Stan spoke broken English, kept to himself, worked from dawn to dark. His dream was simple: keep the farm, pass it to Piotr, give his children a better life than he'd had in Poland. When rationing started in 1942, the government seized control of all dairy production. Cream, butter, cheese, everything went to the military. Stan didn't complain, sent his quota every week, took what little profit the government allowed. But in March 1943, someone accused him of selling butter on the black market. Said they'd seen his wife, Jadwiga, at the Johnstown Farmers Market with unmarked packages, taking cash without ration stamps. Federal agents raided the farm, tore apart the house, searched the barn, checked the cows, found nothing. No illegal butter, no hidden inventory, just a poor farmer trying to survive. But Stan's name was now in the files. Marked. Suspected. 6 months later, in September 1943, someone filed another report. Said they'd heard Stan's oldest son, Piotr, talking about avoiding the draft. Said Piotr had said he'd rather go to jail than fight. Piotr was 17, not even eligible for the draft yet, but the accusations stuck. When Piotr turned 18 in June 1944, he registered as required. The draft board classified him 1A immediately. No deferment, no exemption. Didn't matter that he was the only working son on the farm, that his father needed him, that without him the dairy would fail. 2 weeks later, Piotr shipped out for basic training. August 1944, sent to the Pacific. Died on Saipan on July 9, 1944, shot through the chest by a Japanese sniper. 20 days after his 18th birthday. Stan never recovered. Started drinking. Stopped maintaining the farm. The cows got sick. Production dropped. The commissary canceled his contract. By 1946, he owed 3 years of back taxes. The county foreclosed. Auctioned the farm. Stan and Jadwiga moved into a company row house. Stan worked in the mine until a roof collapse in 1951 crushed his spine. Lived paralyzed for 3 years. Died in 1954 at age 51. Jadwiga followed in 1956. Their surviving children scattered. Christina to Cleveland, Kazimierz to Detroit, Eva to California. None ever came back to Harland. The informant was Gideon Kensington, Ezra Kensington's cousin. Gideon owned a smaller dairy farm 5 miles south. He'd been competing with Stan for the commissary contract for years. Stan's farm was bigger, his cows healthier, his prices better. Gideon couldn't compete. When Stan fell, Gideon took over the contract, made good money during the war. In 1946, when the county auctioned Stan's farm, Gideon bought it, combined it with his own, became the largest dairy farmer in the county. Successful, respected. Nobody knew what he'd done, except Elwood Whitmore, who wrote it all down. And so the web was woven. Everyone a victim, everyone a perpetrator. Ezra Kensington, destroyed by Horace Bledsoe. Stanislav Kowalczyk, destroyed by Gideon Kensington, who was Ezra's cousin. The families intertwined, the betrayals circular, each accusation leading to another, each tragedy spawning the next. The circle closed on itself like a noose. 1946. They arrested Elwood Whitmore in March. Came at night, the way they always did. 3 men in suits, federal agents. The charge was embezzlement, falsifying company records, stealing from the payroll fund. The evidence was manufactured. Deposits in a bank account Elwood had never opened. Signatures on checks he'd never written. Witnesses who swore they'd seen him take cash from the office safe. The real reason was that the new mine superintendent, a man named Virgil Cobb, wanted Elwood's records destroyed. Cobb had arrived in 1945, appointed by the Philadelphia office. He'd spent 6 months reviewing the books, realized Elwood kept parallel records, asked about them. Elwood refused to explain. Cobb understood immediately. The secret ledgers were dangerous, contained information that could destroy people, ruin families, spark lawsuits. Cobb wanted them gone. Elwood refused to surrender them. 2 weeks later, the arrest. Elwood had time to hide the journals under the floorboard in his bedroom. Estelle was 24, working as a clerk at the company office. She'd started in 1943, when the regular clerk left to work in a munitions factory. She was good with numbers, reliable, quiet. They kept her on after the war. She stood in the doorway and watched them take her father. He turned at the threshold, looked into her eyes, said nothing. But she understood. Protect the journals. They're all that'll be left of me. They took him to the county jail in Altoona, held him for 3 months before trial. The trial lasted 2 days. The prosecution presented their manufactured evidence. Elwood's lawyer, a public defender from Johnstown who'd never handled a federal case, did his best. It wasn't enough. The jury convicted. The judge sentenced him to 5 years in federal prison. He served 3 at the penitentiary in Lewisburg. When he came out in June 1949, he was broken. 61 years old, looked 80. Gray hair, hollow eyes, trembling hands, dead inside. He lasted 6 months. Lived with Estelle in the house on Cemetery Hill. Barely spoke. Sat in a chair by the window, staring at nothing. Died of a heart attack in November 1949. The doctor said it was heart failure. Estelle knew better. It was grief. Shame. The knowledge that he'd been destroyed for doing the right thing. Estelle never married, never had children. She took her father's job at the company, became the head accountant. 27 years old, daughter of a convicted embezzler. They kept her because she was good with numbers, because she kept her mouth shut, because she knew too much to fire and too much to trust. The new superintendent, Virgil Cobb, watched her carefully, made sure she didn't keep any parallel records, checked her work constantly. But he never found the journals, because they were hidden, safe, waiting. She continued her father's work, kept the secret journals, wrote down everything during the prosperous 50s when coal was king and Harland thrived, during the declining 60s when oil and natural gas started replacing coal, during the desperate 70s when the mines started failing and layoffs began, during the collapsing 80s when the end was inevitable. 34 years at the same desk. 34 years of numbers that weren't just numbers. Behind every entry was a life. She knew everything. Who earned what? Who worked what hours? Who skimmed from the payroll? Who stole equipment? Who was honest? She stayed silent. She remembered her father's dying words. Keep the records. Wait for the moment. Men asked her to marry. More than once. Frank Kowalczyk, Stan's younger brother, asked her in 1952. Nice man, mechanic at the company garage. She refused. Walter Pryor, electrician, asked her in 1956. She refused. Even Clement Shaw, the town marshal, widowed in 1961, asked her in 1962. She refused them all. Not because she was unattractive. She was plain but not repellent. Tall, thin, with dark hair she wore in a tight bun. Serious face, careful eyes. She was afraid. Afraid a husband would find the journals, start asking questions, want to use them, or destroy them. She couldn't allow that. The journals were her connection to her father, the only thing she had left of him. So she lived alone in the house on Cemetery Hill, worked, stayed silent, waited. And now the moment had come. Winter 1983. The mine had been dying for years. The seams were playing out, the good coal gone, only thin veins of poor quality anthracite left. Foreign coal was cheaper. Environmental regulations made operations expensive. The company stopped investing in new equipment. The buildings decayed. The machinery broke down. Men were laid off in waves, 50 in 1978, 100 in 1980, 150 in 1981. By December 1982, only 100 miners remained. On December 20th, the company announced the closure. Final shift would be March 15th, 1983. 3 months' notice. 400 jobs gone over 5 years. The town would die. Everyone knew it. Everyone knew what came next. The dividing of what remained. Property, equipment, buildings, land. Whatever could still be claimed or sold or stolen. The first to come to Estelle was Dalton Bledsoe. Tall, weathered man in his 50s, with a face carved by decades of underground work. Deep lines around his eyes from squinting in the dark. Scarred hands from handling equipment. Slight stoop from crawling through low tunnels. He knocked on her door one evening after dark. Estelle let him in, made coffee. They sat in her kitchen, small, neat, unchanged since the 1940s. Same table, same chairs, same oilcloth covering, same porcelain sink, same icebox converted to electric in 1958. Time had frozen here. Dalton twisted his cap in his hands. Blue work cap with the Harland Coal logo. He'd worn it for 30 years. Quote 3, quote, he said, voice rough from coal dust. Quote 4, quote. Estelle looked at him for a long time. Dalton was a decent man. Worked as a shot firer in the mine. Dangerous work, drilling holes for explosives, setting charges, bringing down coal faces. Good at it. Careful. In 30 years, never had a serious accident. Didn't drink much, unlike most miners. Raised 3 kids on a miner's wage. She remembered him as a boy. Serious, responsible, good at math. Helped his mother with grocery money by working odd jobs. Remembered how he'd quit school at 16 after his father died in a roof collapse in 1957. Had to support his mother and 2 younger sisters. Got a job in the mine. Worked his way up. In 1960, married Lucille, a quiet girl from Altoona. Remembered his kids being born. Dale in 1961, Marie in 1963, Bobby in 1965. Remembered his slow building of a life. Good man. Honest. But his grandfather Horace had been something else. Horace Bledsoe had informed on Ezra Kensington in 1942. Got Ezra accused of hoarding. Drove Ezra to suicide. Took over Ezra's store. That store became the Bledsoe family fortune, small as it was. Horace ran it for 26 years, made decent money, enough to send Dalton's father to trade school. Dalton's father, Martin, expanded the business in the 1950s, added a lumber yard, started selling building supplies. The family was doing well. Then, in 1968, something happened. The company suddenly discovered that the Bledsoes owed 3 years of back property taxes, taxes that had never been assessed before, taxes Martin swore he'd paid, but the records showed otherwise. The company foreclosed, took the store, sold it to a developer from Pittsburgh who planned to turn it into a grocery. The developer went bankrupt in 1970. The building sat empty, started decaying. By 1983, it was a ruin. The Bledsoes lost everything, moved into a company row house. Martin worked in the mine until black lung killed him in 1975. Dalton had spent 40 years thinking his family was cheated. And they were. Just not the way he thought. Estelle poured him coffee. The cup rattled slightly against the saucer. Her hands weren't as steady as they used to be. Quote 5, she said slowly. Quote 6. Dalton went pale, set his cup down so hard coffee sloshed onto the oilcloth. Quote 7. Quote. Estelle looked him in the eye. Quote 8. Quote. The silence was so thick you could hear the refrigerator humming in the corner. The power had been intermittent for weeks. Penelec, the electric company, was threatening to cut service to the whole town. Non-payment. The company had stopped paying the municipal electric bill in January. Dalton slowly lifted his cup. His hands shook. Coffee sloshed. He didn't drink. That's a goddamn lie, he said. But his voice had no conviction. He wanted it to be a lie, needed it to be, but he could hear the truth in Estelle's voice. Quote 10, quote, Estelle said. Quote 11, quote. Quote 12, quote. Dalton's voice rose. He worked 70 hours a week, built that store from nothing, gave to the church, helped his neighbors. When the O'Malley family lost their house in the fire in 1955, my grandfather gave them money. When Mrs. Kowalczyk was widowed, he carried her groceries for free. Good man. All true, Estelle nodded. He did all that. He was good to his neighbors, good to your family. But it doesn't change what happened in 1942. Ezra Kensington and his family paid the price. Ezra's widow, Margaret, died of grief in 1944. His 3 kids scattered. Vernon went to California, never came back. Judith married a man from Ohio, died in childbirth in 1950. Robert joined the army, was killed in Korea in 1952. The whole family gone, because of what your grandfather did. Dalton stood. His face was twisted, red, angry, but also broken. You have no right. You have no right to judge my grandfather. You, of all people. Your father was a convicted criminal, a thief, embezzler. Who the hell are you to? My father was innocent, Estelle said quietly. He kept records, that's all. He documented what happened. He never betrayed anyone, never informed, never destroyed anyone. He just wrote it down, kept the truth. That's why they arrested him. That's why they sent him to prison. Because he knew too much. Because he wouldn't destroy the records. What's the difference? Dalton shouted. He wrote it down. People died. He kept quiet. People suffered. He knew what was happening and did nothing. That makes him complicit. That makes him guilty too. He grabbed his cap and headed for the door. On the threshold, he turned. I don't believe you. Nobody will believe you. Those records are lies. You're just trying to set us against each other, trying to destroy what's left of this town. Well, it won't work. I won't let it. The door slammed. Estelle sat in her kitchen. She knew this was only the beginning. The next day, Vera Kensington came, Ezra's granddaughter, Vernon's daughter. She was 38, a high school English teacher from Johnstown. Quiet, bookish woman in a threadbare but clean coat, gray wool mended at the elbows. She'd spent 15 years teaching at Johnstown High School, taught Dickens and Austen and Hawthorne to generations of students from working-class families. She loved books more than people, found more truth in fiction than in life. Estelle remembered Vera as a girl, shy, brilliant, always reading, always top of her class. Her family had scattered after Ezra's death. Vernon had moved to California with his young wife in 1945, trying to escape the shame. Vera was born there in 1945, but Vernon never escaped. Drank himself to death in 1968. Vera's mother brought her back to Pennsylvania in 1969. Vera put herself through college working cafeterias, cleaning houses, taking any job that would pay. Graduated from Indiana University of Pennsylvania in 1967. Never married. Lived alone in a small apartment in Johnstown. Survived on a teacher's salary that barely covered rent and groceries. Vera sat at the table without removing her coat. The house was cold. Estelle's oil furnace had broken in January, and she didn't have money to fix it. She heated the kitchen with the wood stove, let the rest of the house freeze. Vera's hands trembled as she pulled a handkerchief from her purse. Linen, embroidered with her initials. Old. A remnant from better times. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 22, underscore, underscore, she said softly, her voice cultured, educated, carrying the faint echo of elocution lessons she'd taken in college. I came to ask, what did our family own? Before they took it all. My father never told me much. He was too ashamed. Drank to forget. I spent my whole life not knowing why we were poor, why my father hated himself, why he died the way he did. But lately I've been wondering, Was it our fault? Or were we victims? Estelle went to the bedroom, pried up the floorboard with a screwdriver. The board came up easily. She'd done this thousands of times over the years. Pulled out one of the journals, leather cover cracked and worn, brought it to the kitchen, set it in front of Vera, opened to the right page. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 24, underscore, underscore. Vera read slowly. Her lips moved, forming words silently. Her eyes filled with tears. She read about the store, about the inventory, about her grandfather's dream of passing it to her father Vernon, about the accusations, about the OPA investigation, about the foreclosure, about the auction, about Horace Bledsoe buying it for $800, about the second accusation, about the FBI, about her grandfather in his garage with his service revolver, about the funeral, about her grandmother weeping, about her father Vernon, 19 years old, dropping out of college to support the family, about the family's slow disintegration. All there, all documented, all true. Vera whispered. Estelle said. Vera's voice was barely audible. Who destroyed us? Horace Bledsoe, the man who got the store. Vera was silent for a long time, staring at the journal, reading and rereading the entries. Finally, she said, I want this documented. I want people to know. I want justice. If I document it, Estelle said slowly, there'll be blood. The Bledsoes will deny it. They'll call me a liar. Half the families in this town have similar stories. If the truth comes out about one, it'll come out about all of them. And they'll tear each other apart. Old men will fight. Families will feud. People will die. Is that what you want? Better than living a lie, Vera said. But even as she said it, doubt flickered in her eyes. Estelle wasn't sure at all. Over the next 2 weeks they came, one after another, asking, demanding, pleading, threatening. Iris Kowalczyk, granddaughter of Stanislav, the dairy farmer who lost everything. She was 60, worked as a nurse in Altoona, drove to Harland on her day off. Wanted to know who informed on her grandfather, who destroyed her family. Luther Kensington, Gideon's son, 55, insurance agent in Pittsburgh, came to Harland to settle his father's estate. Gideon had died in December 1982. Wanted to know if his father really bought the Kowalczyk farm legally or if it was stolen. Mavis Thornton, 51, whose father Eldon had owned a small machine shop until someone accused him of selling tools on the black market. She wanted names, wanted to know who destroyed her father. Wendell Pryor, 68, retired electrician. His uncle Harold had been run out of town in 1944 on accusations of communist sympathies. Wendell wanted to know who wrote the letters to the FBI. Each one came with questions. Each one left with answers that destroyed them. Estelle gave them the truth. Not all of it. She couldn't give them everything. That would light the fuse on a bomb that would destroy what remained of Harland. But she gave them pieces. Enough to understand. Enough to hurt. And they started to turn on each other. Dalton Bledsoe confronted Vera Kensington outside the post office on a Thursday morning, shouted that her grandfather had been a profiteer, that he'd overcharged for goods during the Depression, that the accusations were justified, that he deserved what he got. Vera, quiet all her life, slapped him across the face. Hard. Drew blood from his lip. The sheriff, actually just Clement Shaw, the town marshal, there was no real sheriff anymore, had to separate them. Luther Kensington found out his father Gideon had informed on Stanislav Kowalczyk to get the dairy contract. The revelation destroyed him. His whole life he'd thought his father was a good man, honest farmer, pillar of the community, deacon in the church. Now this. Luther went to Iris Kowalczyk's house in Altoona, tried to apologize, offered her money, his father's estate, everything he'd inherited. Iris spat in his face, told him to get out, told him no amount of money could bring back her grandfather, her uncle Pyotr who died on Saipan, the family farm, the life they should have had. Wendell Pryor discovered that his own Uncle Harold's business partner, a man named Marcus Thornton, Mavis's father Eldon's brother, had written the letters to the FBI accusing Harold of communism. Marcus had wanted to take over the electrical contracting business they'd co-owned. The accusations did that. Harold fled to Chicago, died there in 1958, broken and alone. Marcus ran the business until 1967, made good money, lived well. The partner's son, Marcus Jr., still lived in Harland. Wendell found him at the VFW in Altoona. They got into an argument. Wendell, drunk and furious, broke Marcus Jr.'s jaw with a pool cue. Spent the night in jail. Was charged with assault. The town was coming apart. In January 1984, Estelle got sick. Pneumonia. Started as a cold, got worse, turned into infection. She didn't go to the hospital. Harland Hospital had closed in 1979, beds empty, doctors gone. The nearest facility was 30 miles away in Altoona, and she had no car, no way to get there, no money for an ambulance. She lay in bed, fevered, coughing blood into a handkerchief, waited for the end. But she didn't die. Not then. The fever broke after 5 days. She survived. Weak, skeletal, but alive. Lost 20 pounds, could barely walk, but alive. She lay in bed and thought about the journals, about what they were doing to the town. She'd thought the truth would bring justice, liberation, peace, healing. Instead, it brought hatred, violence, old men fist-fighting in the street, old women screaming accusations across fences, families that had lived side by side for 40 years refusing to speak. Children asking questions their parents couldn't answer. The past, which had been buried for 40 years, was rising like poison gas from the ground. She'd made a mistake. Her father had been wrong. The truth didn't heal. It poisoned. It killed. Maybe some truths were better left buried. Maybe some wounds shouldn't be reopened. Maybe silence was mercy. One night in late February, Estelle got out of bed. Weak, shuffling, holding onto furniture for support. Went to the bedroom, pried up the floorboard, took out all 11 journals, 41 years of records. Her father's work, her own work, the truth. Carried them to the kitchen, opened the wood stove. The fire was low but hot enough. She fed the journals in one at a time, watched 41 years of records curl and blacken, watched names disappear, watched accusations turn to ash, watched the truth die. It took an hour. When she was done, nothing remained but gray powder. She scooped it into a bucket, carried it outside, scattered it in the wind, let it blow away. She went back to bed, felt lighter, felt free, but also felt a terrible guilt. Her father had trusted her. She'd betrayed that trust. But maybe some truths were too heavy to carry. Maybe some burdens should be put down. Maybe protecting the living mattered more than honoring the dead. 3 days later, there was a knock at the door. Estelle was too weak to get up. The knock came again, louder. Then she heard the door open. She never locked it. Nobody in Harland did. Footsteps in the hall. Someone came into the bedroom. It was Clement Shaw, the town marshal. Old man, 73, retired Marine from the Korean War, walked with a cane after his hip was shattered by shrapnel at Chosin Reservoir. He'd kept order in Harland for 30 years, knew everyone, knew everything, saw everything. He stood at the foot of her bed and looked at her with sad, knowing eyes. Quote 36, quote, he said. Quote 37, quote. Estelle didn't answer, just looked at him. I came to ask you to stop, Clement said. This town is dying. The mine's closed. People are leaving. The ones who stay, they're old. They're tired. They just want peace. They just want to live out their last years without fighting, without hating. What you're doing, it's tearing them apart. Old wounds, old hatreds, better left alone. I already stopped, Estelle whispered. I burned the records. 3 days ago. They're gone. All of them. Clement looked at her for a long time. You burned them? All of them? Yes. Every journal, every entry. 41 years. Gone. Clement nodded slowly. That was wise. Your father meant well. But sometimes the truth is too dangerous. Sometimes it's better to forget. He turned to leave. At the door, he paused. Your father was a good man, Miss Whitmore. He tried to do right in a bad time. But some things are better left buried. He left. Estelle lay in bed and stared at the ceiling, wondered if she'd done the right thing. Wondered if her father would forgive her. Wondered if she'd failed him. But also felt a strange peace. The burden was gone. The truth was dead. Maybe now Harland could die in peace, too. February was her last month. The pneumonia came back, worse than before. Fever above 102, coughing blood, lungs filling with fluid. She didn't call for help, didn't call neighbors, just lay in bed and waited. Waited for the end. It came on February 14th, 1984, 3 in the morning. Valentine's Day. Quiet. No pain. Just a slow fading. Estelle closed her eyes and didn't open them again. 62 years old. Died alone. Died silent. Died carrying secrets to the grave. They found her 3 days later, February 17th. A neighbor, Pauline Kowalczyk, Iris's aunt, Stan's younger sister, noticed the chimney wasn't smoking. Knocked on the door. No answer. Went in through the unlocked door. Called out. No response. Found Estelle in bed. Cold. Stiff. Dead 3 days. Face peaceful. Almost serene. As if she'd found rest at last. They buried her quickly. No ceremony, no minister, no eulogy. 10 people came. Clement Shaw, Lucille Bledsoe, Dalton's wife, Pauline, a few old-timers, last residents of Harland. They lowered the casket into frozen ground. The cemetery was on the hill above town, same hill where Ezra Kensington was buried, same hill where Stanislav Kowalczyk was buried, same hill where they'd all end up. They dug the grave with a backhoe. The ground was frozen solid, too hard for shovels. Just lowered her down and covered her up. Lucille put a bunch of dried flowers on the grave, mountain laurel branches with brown leaves. Thank you, Miss Whitmore, she said quietly, for keeping quiet, for protecting us, for burning the truth. After the funeral, Clement went to Estelle's house. He had to inventory the property, file a report with the county. Knew there were no heirs, no will. Everything would go to the state. He walked through the rooms, looked at the shabby furniture, old pieces from the 1940s, chipped walls, worn rugs. Estelle's whole life fit in these rooms, 62 years. And nothing left. No trace, no memory. Just an empty house waiting for demolition. Clement went down to the basement, looking for preserved goods, canned vegetables, anything salvageable. Might as well take them before the scavengers came. He swept his flashlight across the corners. Old shelves, empty jars, dusty tools. Nothing valuable. And then he saw it. In the far corner, behind a stack of old newspapers. A steel lockbox, built into the wall, mortared in place. The lid was open. Inside, nothing but dust. But when Clement shined his light, he noticed something small at the bottom of the box. He bent down. His hip screamed with pain. Picked it up. A scorched scrap of paper, size of his palm, burned edges. Must have fallen from one of the journals when Estelle pulled them out to burn. One small scrap she hadn't noticed. The only fragment that survived. Clement unfolded it carefully. On the burned edge, a few words survived. Written in Elwood Whitmore's cramped accountant's hand. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 48, underscore, underscore. The rest was ash. Clement stood and stared at that scrap. Last trace of truth. Last piece of evidence. Estelle thought she'd burned it all. But one scrap survived. One small piece. That could reignite the war, could spill more blood, could destroy what little piece Harland had left. He looked at the scrap, then at the stairs leading up where the wood stove still held dead embers. He could throw this scrap in the fire, destroy the last trace, bury the truth forever. Let Harland die in peace. Or he could keep it, put it in his pocket, take it to the county archives, preserve it. Let history judge. Let future generations know what happened. Let the truth survive. Clement stood in that basement for a long time, thinking, weighing. The scrap felt heavy in his hand, heavier than paper should feel. The weight of truth, the weight of memory, the weight of judgment. Then he folded the scrap in quarters, put it in his inside jacket pocket, right over his heart. Went upstairs, finished the inventory, locked the house, got in his truck, drove away. What he did with that scrap afterward, nobody knows. Maybe he burned it that night in his own stove. Maybe he kept it in the lockbox by his bed. Maybe he filed it in the county archives in Altoona. Maybe he just lost it, and it disappeared like everything else in Harland. But truth doesn't die. Not really. It lives. In scraps of paper, in people's memories, in ground soaked with blood, in the ruins of buildings, in the names on gravestones. It waits for its moment, to surface again, to demand payment again, to exact vengeance. Harland still exists, on maps, on paper, on highway signs. But in reality, it's dead. 12 houses remain, 12 old people. They live quietly, don't talk to each other, afraid, remembering, knowing. Who informed on whom, who betrayed whom, who owes whom, who destroyed whom. That memory didn't die. It lives, and it will live, as long as one person remembers. And somewhere, maybe in an archive, maybe in someone's pocket, maybe just in the earth under an old house's foundation, lies a scorched scrap of paper, with a few words written in cramped accountant's script. Last trace of truth, last piece of evidence, waiting for its moment. Epilogue: The Weight of Silence. The thing about Harland was that it had never been just one town. It was layered, like the coal seams underground. Each generation had its own Harland, its own version of what happened, who was guilty, who was innocent. The first generation, the ones who came in the 1880s and 1890s, who dug the first shafts and built the first houses, they were all dead by 1942, buried in the cemetery on the hill. Their names weathered off the limestone markers, forgotten. Their children, the ones who lived through the Great War, the Depression, World War II, they were dying now in the 1980s. The last living links to that terrible time. The last ones who remembered what really happened. And with them would die the truth. Their children, the baby boomers born in the late 40s and 50s, had left. Scattered to Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, New York, California, anywhere with jobs and futures. They didn't care about Harland. Didn't want to. The town was a graveyard to them, a place to escape, not remember. When their parents died, they'd come back for the funeral, sell the house for whatever they could get, and leave again. Forever. But the few who stayed, the 12 old people in their 12 houses, they carried the weight. Not just of their own memories, but of their parents' memories, their grandparents' stories. They'd heard it all. Around kitchen tables late at night, in whispered conversations after church, at funerals when the old people got drunk and bitter and started talking about the old days. The truth was passed down like a disease, and it festered. Estelle had thought that by burning the journals, she could kill the past, end the cycle, stop the poison from spreading. But she was wrong. The past wasn't in those pages. It was in the ground, in the shuttered storefronts on Main Street where Ezra Kensington's hardware store once stood, in the empty lot where Eldon Thornton's machine shop had been, in the overgrown fields where Stanislav Kowalczyk once milked 28 cows at dawn, in the cemetery on the hill where Ezra's grave sat 3 rows from Horace Bledsoe's, and nobody had visited either one in years. The past was in the DNA of the place, in the coal dust that coated everything, in the black lung that killed the miners, in the silence that hung over the town like smoke. After Estelle died, the 12 remaining residents of Harland made an unspoken pact. They wouldn't talk about it, wouldn't dig it up, wouldn't ask questions. They'd live out their remaining years in silence, each in their own house, watching TV, tending small gardens, waiting for death. It wouldn't be long. They were old, sick, tired. A few more years at most. Then Harland would be truly dead. No more witnesses, no more memory, just ruins. But silence is a living thing. It grows, it presses down, it suffocates. Dalton Bledsoe stopped going to the VFW hall in Altoona where he used to play cards with other retired miners. Stopped seeing the few friends he had left. Sat in his house and drank. Bourbon. Cheap stuff from the state store. Started in the morning, kept going all day. Lucille tried to talk to him, tried to get him to stop, tried to get him to move in with their daughter Marie in Harrisburg. He refused, told her to go without him. She did, in May. Left him alone. He stayed, drinking, thinking about what Estelle had told him, thinking about his grandfather Horace, wondering if it was true, wondering if his whole life had been built on a lie, wondering if the store, the money, the respect, everything his family had, if it was all stolen. Blood money. One morning in June 1984, Lucille came back to check on him. Found him in the garage, hanging from a rafter. Belt around his neck, chair kicked over. Dead 3 hours. Just like Ezra Kensington 42 years earlier. The circle completed itself. Vera Kensington went back to Johnstown, tried to resume her quiet life. Her routine. Taught summer school at Johnstown High, went to Mass every morning at 7, read in her apartment every evening. But she couldn't. The truth had lit a fire in her. Couldn't sleep, couldn't concentrate, couldn't stop thinking about what had been stolen from her family. Started researching. Went to the county courthouse in Altoona, looked up property records, found the foreclosure documents from 1942, found the liquidation sale, found the bill of sale where Horace Bledsoe bought her grandfather's store. Saw the price. $300 for a business worth $10,000. Robbery. Legal theft. She hired a lawyer. Young man from Johnstown, fresh out of law school, eager to take the case. Filed a lawsuit against the Bledsoe estate, claiming fraudulent transfer of property, seeking restitution. The lawyer took her money. $5,000, her entire savings, filed the papers, did the research. Then explained that the statute of limitations had expired 40 years ago. There was no case, no remedy, no justice, just loss. Vera lost her savings, lost her hope. Died in 1987 in a nursing home in Altoona, penniless and alone. No family, no friends, just nuns who prayed over her body. Luther Kensington tried to make amends, couldn't live with what his father had done. Wrote letters to Iris Kowalczyk, long letters explaining, apologizing, begging forgiveness. Sent money, his father's estate, everything he'd inherited from the farm. $20,000. Iris returned the checks, Every one. Wouldn't cash them. Wouldn't speak to him. Wouldn't forgive. Luther tried calling. She hung up. Luther drove to Altoona, knocked on her door. She wouldn't answer. Luther drank himself to death in 1989. Liver failure. Alone in his apartment in Pittsburgh, 48 years old. Wendell Pryor, the one who'd broken Marcus Thornton Jr.'s jaw in a bar fight, went to prison for assault. 18 months in the county jail. When he got out in 1985, he left Pennsylvania, went west, ended up in Nevada, wrote a letter to Clement Shaw from Reno saying he was never coming back, said Harland was cursed, said everyone who stayed would die there, said the town was built on blood and lies and it would never be clean. He was probably right. One by one, they died. The 12 became 10 in 1985, became 8 in 1988, became 5 in 1992. By 1995, only 3 remained. Pauline Kowalczyk, 88 years old, living on Social Security. Clement Shaw, 85, living on his Marine pension. And Mavis Thornton, 63, the youngest of the survivors, living on disability after black lung forced her to quit her job at the Altoona hospital. They didn't speak to each other. 3 people in 12 houses. 3 people in a dead town. They'd see each other occasionally. At the post office, which still delivered mail twice a week. At the volunteer fire station, which still had monthly meetings even though there was nothing left to save and no volunteers under 70. But they didn't speak. Just nodded. Kept moving. Afraid that if they started talking, they'd have to talk about it. About the past. About what happened. About who did what. Better to stay silent. Better to let it die with them. In 1998, the Harland Coal Company officially dissolved. The corporation was liquidated. Shareholders got pennies on the dollar. The property, what was left of it, was sold to a salvage company from Ohio. They stripped everything of value. Rails torn up and sold for scrap. Copper wire pulled from the walls. Intact timbers from the mine salvaged. Machinery loaded onto trucks and hauled away. What they couldn't sell, they bulldozed. The superintendent's office where Estelle had spent 34 years, demolished in March 1999. The company store, demolished in April. The row houses where miners had lived, demolished in May. By June, all that remained were the 12 private houses on Cemetery Hill, the cemetery itself, and the ruins of the mine entrance, sealed with concrete and rebar to prevent anyone from entering the abandoned tunnels. The salvage company offered to buy the 12 houses, offered good money, $20,000 each, wanted to level them, reclaim the land for a strip mine. Modern technique, no tunnels, just dig straight down with enormous machines. Pauline, Clement, and Mavis all refused. The company raised the offer. $30,000, $40,000, $50,000. They still refused. Not because they loved the houses, because leaving would mean admitting defeat, would mean the past had won, would mean abandoning the dead. Clement Shaw died in 2003, heart attack in his sleep. Pauline found him 3 days later when she noticed his newspapers piling up. Went to check. Found him in his recliner, dead, television still on, playing static. They buried him next to his wife Helen in the cemetery on the hill. Pauline and Mavis stood at the grave, the only 2 mourners. Didn't speak, just stood while the gravedigger filled the hole. When it was done, Pauline walked home. Mavis stayed for a while, looking at the rows of headstones, all the names she'd known. Whitmore, Kensington, Bledsoe, Kowalczyk, Thornton, Pryor, Shaw. All the families that had fought and betrayed and destroyed each other. All gone now, all feeding the same ground. After Clement died, Pauline went through his house. She was the unofficial executor. Nobody else left to do it. No family, no will. She found the scrap of paper in a lockbox in his bedroom closet. Steel box, locked with a combination. She knew the combination. Clement had told her years ago in case something happened. November 11th, 18. Armistice Day, the day World War I ended. Inside the box, Clement's discharge papers from the Marines, his medals from Korea, a photo of his wife, and the scrap. The burned edge, the cramped handwriting, the partial record of Horace Bledsoe's betrayal of Ezra Kensington. Pauline held it in her hands, stared at it, wondered what to do. She could burn it, finish what Estelle started, destroy the last trace of truth. Or she could keep it, preserve it, let someone find it someday, let the truth survive. She stood in Clement's bedroom for an hour, thinking, remembering, her brother Stan, her nephew Pyotr, the farm, everything they'd lost, everything stolen from them. Then she put the scrap back in the lockbox, locked it, put the lockbox back in the closet, closed the door, walked out of the house, never went back. Let the county take it. Let them do what they wanted. When the county auctioned Clement's property in 2004, the lockbox went to an estate sale. Someone bought it for $15. Probably never even looked inside. Took it home. Maybe opened it. Maybe found the scrap. Maybe threw it away, not understanding what it was. Or maybe kept it. Maybe researched. Maybe pieced together the story. Maybe the truth survived after all. Nobody knows. Pauline died in 2009. Stroke while working in her garden. Mavis found her collapsed between the tomato plants. Called 911 from Pauline's phone. Mavis didn't have a phone of her own anymore. Couldn't afford it. The ambulance came from Altoona, 30 miles. Took 45 minutes. Pauline was dead before they arrived. They buried her next to her brother Stan. Mavis was the only mourner. That left Mavis, last person in Harland, 63 years old in 1995, 77 in 2009, still alive in 2012 when this account was written, 80 years old now, lives alone in her house on Cemetery Hill, the house her father built in 1955. 2 stories, gray clapboard, peeling paint, sagging porch, leaking roof, no heat except a wood stove, no running water in winter when the pipes freeze. Has a phone but rarely uses it. Has electricity but the power goes out for weeks at a time. Lives on $700 a month from Social Security and disability. Barely enough for food and firewood. She could leave. Her daughter Carol in Philadelphia begs her to come live in the city. Calls every Sunday. Offers her a room in her house. Offers to pay for a nursing home. Offers everything. Mavis refuses, because leaving would mean abandoning them. All of them. The dead ones. The ones buried on the hill. The ones whose stories Estelle kept in her journals and then burned. The ones whose betrayals and suffering and guilt still hang in the air like coal dust. Leaving would mean they'd be forgotten. Truly forgotten. And Mavis can't allow that. She knows the truth. Her father, Eldon Thornton, had been accused of black market activity in 1943, selling tools without ration stamps. The accusation was false, complete fabrication. He'd been set up by a competitor who wanted his machine shop. The FBI investigated, found nothing, but the damage was done. Eldon lost his contracts with the mine, lost his business, declared bankruptcy in 1945, worked as a day laborer for the rest of his life, died of a stroke in 1947, a broken man at 49. Mavis had spent her whole life thinking it was bad luck, bad timing. Then Estelle told her the truth, told her who'd informed, her father's own brother, Uncle Marcus, who wanted the business for himself, who got it after Eldon failed, who ran it successfully for 20 years, who died rich and respected, whose son, Marcus Jr., the one Wendell Pryor broke the jaw of, still lives 3 counties over, works as a real estate agent, has a nice house in Harrisburg, a nice family, 3 grandchildren, Doesn't know what his grandfather did. Doesn't care. Mavis could go to him, could tell him, could demand, what? An apology? Money? Justice? But what would that accomplish? The informant is dead. The victim is dead. The whole generation is dead. Only the children and grandchildren remain, and they're innocent. They didn't do anything wrong. They just inherited the guilt, inherited the blood money, inherited the lies. So Mavis stays in Harland, tends her garden in summer, burns wood in winter, watches the ruins, keeps vigil, waiting. For what? She doesn't know. Maybe for forgiveness, maybe for justice, maybe just for death. Probably death. She's 80, bad heart, arthritis, black lung from working 20 years in the mine office, breathing coal dust every day. Won't be long now. The town around her continues to decay. Roofs collapse under snow. Windows break in storms. Vines grow through foundations. The cemetery fence rusts and falls. Headstones tilt and sink into the earth. In 50 years, maybe less, there'll be nothing left. Just forest. Just Pennsylvania hardwoods reclaiming the land. Just grass and wind and the quiet sound of leaves and the distant memory of what once stood here. But the truth will remain. In the ground, in the stones, in the bones of those who lived and died and destroyed each other in the name of survival, in the name of profit, in the name of fear. And maybe, somewhere, in an attic or a basement or a forgotten archive box in some county building in Altoona, that scrap of paper still exists, still waits, still holds its fragment of truth. __quote _49 __. 9 words, 40-some letters, 1 betrayal, 1 life destroyed, 1 truth preserved, waiting for someone to find it, to read it, to understand it, to remember. Because that's what truth does. It waits. It survives. It refuses to die. Even when we burn it, even when we bury it, even when we run from it. It waits. And when we're ready, when we're finally ready to face what we've done, what our fathers did, what our grandfathers did, it'll be there, waiting in the ground, waiting in the ruins, waiting in the silence. The truth is patient. It has all the time in the world.